The rope swung lazily in the dry wind, whispering over the gallows beam like a snake testing the air. No voices rose from the gathered townsfolk. They stood in a hard ring, hats low, eyes bright with the kind of heat that didn't come from the sun. Boots shifted in dust. A woman's cough cut the silence, brittle and quick. The boy stood barefoot on the warped boards, wrists tied in front, had lifted just enough to meet the eyes that glared at him. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was tangled and crusted with the grit of the jail floor. He looked about 14, maybe younger, but there was something in his stillness that belonged to older men, something that said he knew what was coming and wasn't afraid. Or maybe he was too tired to show it. The sheriff stepped forward, broad-shouldered and slow-moving, his face carved from years of sun and whiskey. He unfolded a slip of paper and cleared his throat. The wind tugged at the brim of his hat. "By order of the territory," he began, "this boy, taken in the act during the killing of—" A voice from beyond the circle cut him short. Not loud, but clear enough to halt the sheriff mid-breath. "You hang him, you'll have to hang my son." Heads turned. The crowd parted just enough for a lone rider to push through, a woman in black, straight-backed in the saddle of a sway-backed mare. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, her face hidden behind a widow's veil. She dismounted without hurry, each step deliberate, the long shadow of her hat stretching ahead of her. The sheriff squinted. "Ma'am, this ain't your—" "It is now." She stopped at the foot of the gallows, lifting her chin toward the boy. "He's mine. You'll not take him." The murmur rose, low and sharp. Someone spat in the dirt. An old man shook his head. "He's Apache," a woman near the front said, as if the word itself was enough to pass sentence. "I know what he is," the widow answered, her voice even. "And I know what you are, too." The sheriff stepped down from the platform, boots thudding on the packed earth. "This ain't the time for playing at charity. He's accused of killing a white rancher. Folks here. I heard what he's accused of." She tilted her head just enough for the veil to sway, revealing eyes that didn't blink. "Accusations don't make a man guilty. Or a boy." "You weren't there," someone in the back called. "We saw him with a rifle in his hands." The widow glanced at the boy, who hadn't moved except to turn his head slightly toward her voice. "And what did you see before that?" she asked the crowd. "What you see depends on where you're standing." The sheriff shifted, clearly wishing she'd back down. But there was something in her stance, in the quiet way she spoke, that rooted him to hesitation. "You have no claim over him," he said finally. "I do now," she replied. "By my word." The wind pushed a curl of dust between them, carrying the faint scent of dry mesquite. The sheriff looked toward the men on either side of him. Ranchers, shopkeepers, drifters who'd found themselves suddenly part of a jury. None stepped forward, but their eyes burned with the promise of it. "Take him, then," the sheriff said at last, his tone like iron left out in the cold. "But you get him off my land by sundown. If he's here after that, I'll not stop these folks from what they aim to do." The widow nodded once. She stepped up onto the gallows and cut the rope binding the boy's wrist with a small knife she'd drawn from her sleeve. The boy looked at her hand before he looked at her face, as if trying to decide which could be trusted. "Come," she said. He followed, stepping down from the platform without glancing back at the rope above him. The crowd parted again, not for respect, but for the same reason men step aside for a rattler. They weren't sure if she'd strike. They walked to the mare, the widow mounting with the ease of someone who'd spent years in a saddle. She didn't offer to lift the boy, just waited until he swung himself up behind her, his hands resting lightly on the back of her belt. No one spoke as they rode out. The sheriff watched from the edge of the circle, the slip of paper still in his hand, the words unspoken. The sun had begun to drop toward the western hills, laying long shadows across the road. The town behind them shrank to a cluster of warped roofs and crooked chimneys, the gallows just a dark post against the sky. Only when they'd passed the last fence line did the widow speak, her voice low enough that the wind nearly swallowed it. "You can ride quiet all you want," she said. "But you're mine now. That's how it is." The boy said nothing, but his grip on her belt tightened, almost imperceptibly, as if he understood the bargain she made in front of everyone who might wish them both dead. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. The mare's ears flicked back, and the widow kept her eyes fixed on the pale ribbon of road ahead. knowing that every mile they put between themselves and the gallows was only the start of the trouble to come. By the time the last orange edge of sun dipped behind the ridge, they were little more than two silhouettes riding into the vast, empty dark, one woman and one boy, bound together by nothing more than a claim spoken aloud in a town that would never forgive it. The desert spread around them like an ocean of copper and bone, the horizon blurred by heat and distance. The mare's hooves drummed a slow rhythm, each step sending up a puff of dust that clung to the boy's bare feet and the widow's skirt. Neither spoke. The air between them was filled with the hiss of the wind and the occasional groan of leather tack. The boy rode lightly, his hands never clutching more than needed, as if any sudden grip might bind him to her in a way he wasn't ready for. She felt the wariness in him, the same she felt in soldiers returned from battle, eyes always measuring the land, posture ready to flee at the first wrong sound. He smelled faintly of smoke, not the kind that clung to clothes from a hearth, but the acrid kind that lingered after gunfire. "Drink," she said at last, holding the canteen back toward him. He hesitated before taking it, tilting his head just enough to meet her gaze. His eyes were dark and still, like a river under shade. He drank in short swallows, then handed it back without a word. They crested a ridge where the land opened wide, revealing a stretch of pale scrub running to a distant line of cottonwoods. Beyond that was her place, or what was left of it. She had not ridden this trail in weeks, and the sight was like opening a wound she'd been careful not to touch. The house was small, its porch sagging toward the ground, shingles missing from the roof like teeth from a skull. Fence posts leaned drunkenly, a few snapped clean, wire dangling loose. The corral held no stock. Even the windmill stood still, its blades rusted into silence. The boy slid down from the mare before she could speak, walking toward the dry well as if drawn by instinct. He crouched, tapping the edge of the stone with his fingers, then straightened and looked at her. She understood without words. No water here. "We'll manage," she said, though she wasn't sure for how long. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. Dust had gathered in the corners, and the table bore the faint ring of an old coffee cup that no one had washed away. She set down her shotgun within easy reach, the habit of years. The boy moved quietly, exploring the single room, touching the wall as if learning the boundaries of this new cage. By nightfall, the desert's heat bled away into cold. Coyotes sang from the far hills, their voices sharp and lonely. She lay on the bed, the quilt pulled to her chin, listening to the faint scuff of the boys settling on the floor by the door. She didn't ask him why he chose that spot. She already knew. Doors were the first place trouble came. Her mind drifted back to the gallows, to the look in the sheriff's eyes when she'd spoken. She'd shamed him in front of the town, but shame was a fragile shield. By sundown tomorrow, he could trade it for pride, and pride could kill just as quick as hate. At dawn, she found him outside, standing still in the pale light, watching the hills. His bare feet were damp with dew. He didn't turn when she stepped onto the porch. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed toward the edge of the property. There, half buried in the dust, lay a rattlesnake, its head crushed, body still coiled. She looked around, no boot prints close enough to claim it. Someone had left it there. A message. "Inside," she said, her voice low. He obeyed, though his eyes lingered on the hills as he passed her. They worked that morning without speaking much. She showed him how to tighten fence wire, her fingers quick despite the cold. He watched her closely, then tried himself, his small hand steady. Later, he showed her a way to split a cactus to reach the wet core inside, the pulp clean and sweet on the tongue. She nodded her thanks, and for the first time, she saw the faintest shift in his face. Something near the edge of a smile. Near midday, she heard the distant rumble of hoofbeats. She set down her tools and motioned for the boy to keep low. Two riders passed along the ridge, their figures black against the white glare of the sky. They didn't stop, but their heads turned toward the ranch as they rode. "They'll come back," she said under her breath. That evening, while she patched a hole in the roof, the boy wandered to the edge of the yard and crouched by a patch of sandy ground. When she came closer, she saw he had drawn a shape with a stick, a crude outline of hills and a winding trail. He tapped a spot with the stick, then another, looking up at her as if to say this is where they will come. "You've been watching," she said. He gave a single nod. The sun sank fast, washing the desert in red. She stoked a small fire on the hearth, the smell of mesquite smoke filling the air. He sat cross-legged nearby, staring into the flames, shadows deepening on his young face. She wondered how much blood those eyes had already seen, and how much more they would before this was done. When the coyotes started again, closer this time, she rose and checked the latch on the door. The boy's gaze followed her movements, then returned to the fire. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest trace of voices. Too far to make out the words, but near enough to set her teeth on edge. They were not alone out here, not by a long stretch. She sat back down across from him, the firelight flickering between them. "You stay close to me," she said, "no matter who comes." His dark eyes met hers without wavering. He gave no answer, but she didn't need one. She saw in the way he held her gaze, the way he hadn't looked away even on the gallows. The night grew cold, the fire snapping softly. Somewhere beyond the walls, something moved in the dark. The widow listened for it, every muscle alert, her shotgun within reach. The boy didn't stir. He was listening too. The desert held its breath, and so did they. The saloon smelled of whiskey and old smoke, its walls yellow by years of lamplight. Men crowded the tables, voices low but thick with anger. The sheriff stood near the bar, jaw set, eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. He didn't drink from it. He just held it, like it might anchor him in the storm brewing around him. "He's still out there," one of the ranchers said, slapping the table with his palm. "Boy like that raised wild. Don't change just 'cause she says he's hers now. He's Apache. You all know what that means." Murmurs rippled. The word carried the weight of raids, burned homesteads, bodies found in dry washes. It was a word that didn't need proof. The sheriff shifted, finally setting down his glass. "We've got no witness who saw him pull the trigger. That rancher's widow saw enough. Another man shot back, said she found him with the rifle. That's enough for me." "And if she's wrong?" the sheriff asked, though his voice lacked conviction. He was looking for a reason to leave the matter buried. But the room was full of men who had no interest in burying anything but the boy. When he left the saloon, the air outside felt colder, the wind sharper. A scrap of paper slapped against the post by the door. Fresh ink, nailed there by someone eager to see it read. Asterisk reward. $50 for the Apache boy. Dead or alive. Asterisk. Miles away. The widow worked at the table, mending a tear in her coat by the light of a single lamp. The boy sat near the window, knees pulled up, chin resting on them as he stared into the night. His gaze tracked every shadow, every flicker of movement in the moonlight. A sound came from the dark beyond the yard, soft, measured, the crunch of hooves. The boy straightened, muscles tight. She took the shotgun from the wall and eased to the door. A lone rider waited at the edge of the yard. The horse was lean, its hide shining in the moonlight. The man on its back wore his hair in two long braids, a single feather bound near the end of one. His eyes found the boy immediately. They spoke without words, a rapid exchange of signs. The widow stepped down from the porch, the gun still in her hands. "What do you want?" The rider's voice was quiet, but carried in the stillness. "Not me. Others. They come soon. From the town, from the hills. Both want the boy." "Why?" He glanced at the boy again, and there was no softness in his expression. He was taken alive. "Some of my people see that as shame. Some see it as danger. Your people see it as justice. Neither will let him live long." She studied him. "And you?" "I tell you so you can choose. Take him away now. Maybe you both live. Stay, you both die." He pulled the reins, turning the horse toward the darkness. "Decide fast." The boy was watching her as she came back inside, his face unreadable. She set the shotgun down, feeling the weight of the choice settle heavier than the gunmetal. The next day, she found hoof prints in the soft earth behind the barn. 2 sets, heading in different directions. She didn't like that. It meant eyes were on them from more than one side. She sent the boy to fetch water from the cactus patch. When he returned, he brought more than water, In his palm lay a small stone carved roughly into the shape of an arrowhead. He placed it on the table, his eyes fixed on hers, as if to say this is a sign. She didn't need him to speak. She knew what it meant. Someone was marking their place. That night, they ate little, the silence between them tight as drawn wire. The wind was rising, carrying dust across the yard in thin veils. The sky held the strange, yellowed light that comes before a storm. She sat near the fire, loading shells with slow, deliberate motions. The boy crouched on the floor across from her, watching each movement, memorizing. When she was done, she slid a few toward him. He took them without hesitation, tucking them into the pocket of his shirt. Outside, the windmill groaned. Something creaked in the darkness, fence post or saddle leather. She couldn't tell. The boy's eyes shifted toward the window, then back to her. He didn't need to say it. They were not alone tonight. When the first torchlight flickered on the horizon, she didn't move, just watched it grow brighter, multiplied by others until the glow stretched like a chain of fire across the ridge. The boy rose, went to the corner where the rifle leaned, and brought it to her. She took it, feeling the weight settle into her shoulder. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying with it the distant shouts of men. From somewhere farther off came another sound, low, rhythmic, the drumming of hooves in numbers too great for a hunting party. The boy stood beside her now, close enough she could feel the heat of him. He said something in his own language, the words soft but the tone heavy with meaning. She didn't know the exact translation, but she knew it was not a question. The torches on the ridge began to move, spilling down toward the plain, their light wavering in the wind. From the other side of the hills, faint shapes gathered in the darkness. Shapes that moved without light, their presence marked only by the occasional glint of metal under the moon. The widow drew in a slow breath, the firelight catching the edge of her cheek. The boy's hand brushed hers as he reached for more shells. The wind roared, the air thick with dust, and somewhere in that mingled darkness and light, two forces were drawing nearer, neither with mercy in their heart.